And in this part of the Heroic Tomb of Sargeras guidance, I'm going to go over Retribution Paladin specific advice. Now, I'm going to assume that you are familiar with the aspects of the different fights on Heroic. If you're not, then you want to check out my parts 1, 2 and 3 of Heroic Tomb of Sargeras general guidance that goes through boss specific mechanics and what you should do about them. So what we've got here are anything to do with Retribution Paladin specific stuff, which is talents, legendaries, tier pieces, using Shield of Vengeance, as well as some miscellaneous tips as well. It's not going to include trinkets. I'm going to do a separate video on that next week. Okay, so we'll start with talents first of all, as this is the easiest, but it's also the one I get the most questions on. Now, this is what your talents are going to look like. It's mostly straightforward here. So in the first row, we are just going to take Final Verdict. Doesn't matter what fight it is, you take Final Verdict. Execution Sentence, even if it is simming slightly ahead for you on single target, assumes you're going to play it perfectly. It's very difficult to play it perfectly. And also, none of the fights are really patchwork type fights, so there's a lot of things going on that can make it much more difficult to play it perfectly. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't even sim ahead anyway, even on single target. Consecration is one of those talents that is sort of okay in theory. If you can have loads of ads around you all the time and they don't move out of this thing, then yeah, Consecration can be good. That doesn't happen on any fight in Tomb of Sargeras. So we're always going to take Final Verdict. In the second tier, there is an actual choice between Fires of Justice and Zeal. When I say choice, I don't really mean choice. I mean there's some fights you'll take one and some fights you'll take the other. We never take Greater Judgment, but wait for my video on what's coming in 7.3 because that might change in the future. But in the here and now, before 7.3 comes out, it's either Fires of Justice and Zeal. And ultimately, it comes down to this. If you're going to be doing pure single target damage, it's very likely that you're going to be using Zeal, and I'll explain why in a moment. If you're going to be doing any sort of cleave, then you're very likely to take Fires of Justice. Now, what this does is it links up with the tier 60. I'm going to bypass the 45 level talents for a moment. And for the one that modifies our Blade of Justice. Now, in this level 60 tier, we never take Virtue's Blade. Obviously, always sim talents for yourself, but there's no realistic situation in which we take Virtue's Blade. It's a dead talent at the moment. So it's either Blade of Wrath or Divine Hammer. Now, Blade of Wrath is what we take on single target now. Divine Hammer used to be taken on pretty much everything, but it was nerfed for Tomb of Sargeras opening. So it's still really good for cleaving, even with as few as 2 targets. And I'm going to go over the fight in which we can use this. But if it's pure single target, as it is for most fights, we're going to take Blade of Wrath. Now, here's why we sort of take Zeal for single target, because you look at Zeal and you think that's a bit of it's doing a bit of cleave there, shouldn't we take that for AoE? Here's the thing, Zeal has a much longer recharge time than Fires of Justice. The reason why we take or have taken Fires of Justice a lot in the past is because it helps smooth out our rotation. This is particularly true when we take Divine Hammer. Divine Hammer has a longer cooldown than the base version of Blade of Justice, so we need those quicker Crusader strikes to help smooth out our rotation, generate a little bit of extra holy power. However, on fights where we take Blade of Wrath, which is most of them now, then it's not only got a shorter cooldown, but also it's got a chance of re-proccing itself so that you can cast more of these. That means you don't need to cast Crusader Strike as much because it's a lower priority builder. Now, if we're not going to be casting Crusader Strike as much as we did, then Fires of Justice loses a lot of its benefit. So we might as well use Zeal, which does more damage per hit. So if you're not going to use it as much, the fact that it's got a slightly longer recharge time doesn't actually matter, because it's still generally there when we need it. Also, the passive amount of free cleave does no harm either. So these two talents work in combination. So if you're going to go for cleave or AoE, you take Divine Hammer, but Fires of Justice, because with Divine Hammer longer cooldown means we do need Fires of Justice to smooth it all out. But if it's pure single target or single target focus, then you take Blade of Wrath, and that goes well with Zeal. So it's those two tier talents work together. But they're also the only ones where there's any serious choice. Now, we'll go back to the level 45 ones, but there isn't really much choice here as well. You take Fist of Justice. Fist of Justice is occasionally useful. There are some ads on Tomb of Sargeras fights that can be stunned with Fist of Justice, so why not take it? You are never going to be using Repentance, let's face it, and you're not going to use Blinding Light realistically either. When it comes to the tier 75 talent, all of them you can argue have a use in different situations. Eye for an Eye is often the standard one, and there are a couple of fights where this is useful. The most notable fight where this is useful is Mistress Sassine, because the Hydra shot is physical damage, so by using Eye for an Eye whenever you're either hit by it or are soaking in it, using that reduces the amount of damage you take. Now you won't be able to use it on every Hydra shot, but you can generally use it every second Hydra shot. Word of Glory might be useful if you're in a situation where healing is a bit ropey now and then. If you don't mind sacrificing some holy power, you never know, it might do some good, but generally speaking, it's unlikely to be useful. Justicar's Vengeance, of course, is a very expensive heal, but at least it means it's good self-healing if you get into, again, a tight situation where you don't think the healers are going to get your back. Maybe you choose to take that, but generally speaking, Eye for an Eye is the one you would take. In the level 90 tier, Divine Intervention is generally the one to take on progress. After all, the more you can survive, the better. The only other choice really in this row would be Cavalier, and that's on fights where there's a lot of movement. Now that really covers potentially Maiden of Vigilance, definitely Fallen Avatar. Other than that, there aren't really any fights where you're going to need that movement speed. Your baseline Divine Steed will cover you for all other fights. Judgment of Light doesn't actually do enough to be worthwhile, even as utility. And then in the final talent tier, of course, it is just Crusade. That's all there is to it. It is the talent you take in every scenario. So in summary, the only real choice you have from this, the only deviation, would be in an AoE or cleave fight where you would take Divine Hammer and Fires of Justice. Those fights would include Harjatan, Mistress Sassine, and Desolate Host. You could possibly take it on Demonic Inquisition, but I will just caution here. If your guild group stacks up the bosses when neither of them are casting their torment building abilities of Fell Squall or Bonesaw, then sure, Divine Hammer is going to allow you to do more personal DPS. Your overall DPS at the end of the fight will be higher, and if going for ranks is your thing, then that is probably what you would want to do. However, bear the following in mind. First of all, if your raid is not in the habit of keeping them stacked together, then it's not going to benefit you because you're not going to get to cleave. Secondly, if the tanks are not very quick at moving them apart when either Bonesaw or Fell Squall is about to be cast, then you run the risk of building up a lot of torment quickly. Now, of course, you may decide that it's worthwhile still burning through that, getting a full torment bar, getting yourself inside, getting some orbs really quickly and back out, and you might consider that over the course of the fight, that is a net benefit to you. My personal view on this one is I just focus on the boss dying. I really don't care about my personal DPS. For progress, you definitely want to go single target on this one. But if you do want to rank, and I'm not going to judge you if you're not going to put your raid at risk, and let's face facts, it's an early boss, it's a relatively straightforward boss. You can afford, if you are in the ranking mind, to take a few liberties and not screw your own raid over. So if you want to do that, you're probably better off taking Divine Hammer. Okay, on to legendaries, and there are a number of legendaries that can potentially be useful now, so let's go through them. The main legendaries of choice in this tier for every fight are Chain of Thrayn and Liadrin's Fury Unleashed. However, the reason for that is because it is quite common for experienced raiders to, at the moment, be wearing 2-piece tier 19 and 4-piece tier 20. This means that there is no room for Whisper of the Nathrezim. If, however, you don't have access to all those tier pieces, and you wouldn't be losing any set bonuses by using Whisper of the Nathrezim, again, sim it for yourself, but you may well find that Chain of Thrayn and Whisper of the Nathrezim are coming out a little on top. Now, what I would also say at this point is the new ring, Soul of the High Lord, a lot of people quite like that. They like Divine Purpose, and a lot of people enjoy that proc-based gameplay. What I would say here, if we consider the following 4 legendaries, so Chain of Thrayn, Liadrin's Fury Unleashed, Whisper of the Nathrezim, and Soul of the High Lord. If you sim different combinations of those legendaries, and it's not making you miss out on a set bonus, as I say, by using the cloak, you may well find that any 2 of those 4 actually do roughly the same amount of damage on a sim. And remember, a sim is not an exact model for the actual fight. In other words, even though there'll be a strict ranking system, there's not going to be a huge percentage difference between the top ranking combination and the bottom, as long as it's 2 of those 4. So in other words, use whichever ones you prefer. Take, for example, Liadrin's Fury Unleashed. That one is the one that gives you a bit of holy power during Crusade. Obviously, that is devalued if you don't have your rotation down. I mean, you certainly need to be using that on a train dummy in practicing because you don't want to be wasting holy power. It's no good if it generates its holy power when you've already got 5, for example. Same with Whisper of the Nathrezim. It will be assuming a certain amount of uptime on the cloak debuff. Again, if you're not tracking it or you're not very comfortable keeping that buff up for long periods of time, then again, that's going to become devalued. The only one that doesn't require any extra skill is Chain of Thrayn. As long as you are able to do max DPS during Crusade, then that just has a passive effect. In terms of other sensible legendaries, let's say you don't have any of those 4, or at least you don't have 2 of them. Scarlet Inquisitor's Expurgation, the new legendary chest, that could potentially be useful on AoE based fights, such as Desolate Host, Mistress Sassine and Harjatan. I wouldn't take it on any of the others. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should take that chest on even those 3 fights. It's just that if you didn't have access to any of the other good ones, and especially because, again, the chest is going to take up a tier slot, again, it's certainly not worth missing out on that set bonus. But if you didn't have all those set bonuses, it could be a good one for those sort of cleave fights. Now, let's say you've only just started playing Retribution, you don't have many legendaries at all, and you don't have any of those, or at least you don't have 2 of those list. So what are some other ones? The shoulders are okay. They're a little bit behind the main ones. They are okay as a throughput legendary, though. Again, it takes a tier slot, though, so it's not worth taking if you're going to be missing out on the set bonus. Now, Sephir's a Secret can in theory be our best legendary. There are plenty of fights where there are interrupt mechanics, and interrupting is the best way to proc Sephir's a Secret if you are allowed to interrupt whenever you're able to. So if, for example, you say to your raid group, I'm going to get the next interrupt, and they do that and no one snipes you, then it can actually be amazing. But of course, we know how that works. In reality, someone probably will snipe you. So for that reason, it's not necessarily brilliant. But if you don't have any of the other legendaries, then it is a good one to take. The extra little bit of movement speed also comes in useful in some fights. Kil'jaeden's Burning Wish, of course, is significantly behind in legendary terms, but it is, if you don't have any of those other legendaries, I mean, it's easily your best trinket in any situation. So make sure you use it ideally when there's as many adds up as possible. If you can combine it with plenty of stacks on your crusade, then all to the better. Finally, let's say you don't have any DPS legendaries. Then the other ones that can be useful are the Armed Guards of Ore, Aegis Yalma. They're the ones with a bit of a cheat death in it, as well as procking a huge Shield of Vengeance. That's always nice on progress. Obviously, you're unlikely to get any use out of it once you're on farm. Agrimar's Stride for the extra movement could be useful on a few fights, in particular Avatar. If you don't have access to anything else, then of course that might be suitable as well. Now, really quickly, when it comes to the tier sets themselves in terms of choice of pieces, as with everything else, of course, you want to try and sim the combinations you think are going to work best. But in general terms, what is quite useful for us secondary stat wise is haste, followed by crit. Versatility sort of in the middle there, and we ideally like to leave mastery alone. Now, you will not get away completely with mastery at this stage. You're likely to have to wear some of it on your tier piece somewhere. I've been quite fortunate recently. At the moment, I'm only wearing, out of my 6 tier pieces, that's 2 tier piece 19 and 4 set tier 20. Only one of those pieces, the chest, has got any mastery on it. But the same was not true last week. Last week I had over 30% mastery. At the moment I'm doing this, I've got about 18% mastery. Bargain. But of course there are other things that are into the mix as well that can affect it. There's the item level. So if you get a huge Titan Forge piece, even if it's got mastery on it, it's probably still going to be really good for you. If you've got a piece with a socket on it, that can be really good for you as well. So this is why it is important to sim it, whether it's using Simcraft or Raidbots or whatever you prefer, just to make sure you know that you've got the right combination on. Now, when it comes to Shield of Vengeance, of course, I'm going to go through on each fight when we want to proc this. This is a defensive ability, but it's one that we use aggressively because it does damage. If it does damage, it means we want to use it to do damage. The problem with it is essential that it blows up. We have to consume the whole Absorb Shield, otherwise we get no damage out of it altogether. So, what are the abilities that are almost guaranteed to proc it? Now on Goroth, you're going to have to play it by ear a little bit. There's no sort of guaranteed time when you can use it. Remember, Shield of Vengeance will not do damage unless you are within 8 yards of the target. Now the best way to do it is during Infernal Burning if the boss is dragged over to the pillar you're stood behind. But that is probably not going to be the case a lot of the time. So you just generally want to do it whenever you can see some damage being done. For example, if someone with Shattering Star is about to go up and break some pillars, there's likely to be some AoE damage going out there. So you might want to proc it then. It might well explode that. Similarly, someone with Crashing Comet, maybe it's you and you can stand within 8 yards of the boss without covering other people. By all means, use it then. Maybe someone else gets hit by it and they're in melee and they're trying to stay within melee range whilst moving away from everyone else. Maybe you just sort of stand on them. Tell them you're doing it, otherwise they're going to keep running away from you. Just sort of say, I'm going to stack on you. Don't worry about it. I'm doing it for damage. Demonic Inquisition is tricky, as you're not supposed to take damage at all. So it can be a bit of hit and miss on this one. You shouldn't obviously be taking damage from the Bone Saw or the Fell Squall deliberately. I suppose if you're in the mind of ranking and you want to use your Divine Hammer, and you're going to take the Torment and then go in and quickly cleanse it and get back out again, then obviously that is a period of time when you're going to be taking enough damage to break a Shield of Vengeance as well, so I guess you could use it then. If you're playing the fight sensibly, there is no damage that is sort of guaranteed really, so it is a little bit hit and miss. You can use it at certain times. Maybe you use it just before quills and maybe someone's a bit careless and throws the quills right through you. It is very difficult to say on that fight. Harjatan is much easier. Unchecked Rage, use it then. That's when the tank is going to move the boss onto the raid, so you'd all take your split damage from Unchecked Rage. Mistress, Hydra Shot is the obvious one to use it on. If you get targeted by Hydra Shot, of course you're supposed to move out, so there's no point in using it then. But if you don't get targeted, then you should use it while soaking. Make sure you're in melee range. Obviously, you improve your chances of exploding it if you try and pick the Hydra Shot line with the fewest people in it, as well as doing everyone else a favour in that line. On Sisters, Corporeal Shot's quite a good one, where people drag that through the raid. Make sure that you're in it. It's not guaranteed to explode, though. That's the problem with it. If you get Moonburn and Shield of Vengeance is active, available, I should say, make sure you activate it and don't be in a rush to cleanse your Moonburn. Wait until it's blown up your Shield of Vengeance first. If there's nothing else, you could maybe even take a small glaive to the face with it on. Don't get yourself killed there. Desolate Host should be quite easy in the Spirit Realm. You could stay in for a bit on Wailing Souls until it's blown up. Shouldn't take long. You can use it on Shattering Scream. It's less easy outside. Rupturing Slam might well be a best bet, but it's not guaranteed to break it. Most of the other sources of damage, it's a bit reckless to try and take it and benefit from Shield of Vengeance. If you get targeted with a spear, you could sort of go... There is a place to go behind the boss where you wouldn't get knocked off and would still be within 8 yards of the boss and not within 8 yards of the people. The problem with the Tormented Cries is it silences you while you're doing it, so it's not necessarily to your benefit to try and take advantage of that. Unless, of course, you're targeted with it, in which case you use it then. Maiden is quite straightforward. When she casts the hammer, whichever side you are on, then that is definitely going to blow it up. That does plenty of damage. On Avatar, almost anything, if we're honest. But Soaking Touch of Sargeras is good, and that's a reliable time to do it as well. On Kil'jaeden, the Reflections have an AoE cast, which will almost certainly break it. So what I do is just before the Reflections are about to be spawned, I just pop it and then go into full AoE mode, and I know that it's going to break it then. Soaking the Focus Dreadflame, if it's within 8 yards of the boss and during a ground phase, can be a good way to break it. That is definitely going to break it. But other than that, it might be a little bit more hit and miss. Now, when it comes to some general miscellaneous advice, there are a couple of Retribution specific things which may be of use. Now, thanks to the changes, we don't really get to use our Blessing of Protection for anything really useful on Heroic. Maybe a couple of things on Mythic. But Blessing of Freedom can get some good use on Avatar. For ourselves, it's all entirely selfish. If when the daggers are coming in, If it looks like someone who's got the daggers on is aiming it in a bad place, it looks like it's going to go through you, then you might want to put Blessing of Freedom on yourself so that if you do end up in a patch, you can move out of it without being slowed. Most especially if the dagger is on you, obviously get yourself into a sensible place. But again, if you put Blessing of Freedom on yourself, it means you'll be able to move out quickly. There is a point in the fight when the daggers sort of coincides with Unbound Chaos. In other words, the daggers go out, and okay, they go out, and then Unbound Chaos straight away after it. It's extremely embarrassing if you get killed by the Unbound Chaos because you were slowed by the daggers when you're a class that's got the ability to break movement impairing effects. So what I would just do now, especially after this, is just pre-Blessing of Freedom yourself if any daggers look a bit dodgy, and especially if they're on you, because you do get to use it on every single set of daggers, and when else are you going to use it, let's be honest. When it comes to Kill Jaden, be aware that when the ads come in, you want to be on full holy power, you want to build up, you also want to be on max stacks. It's possible to do that in Heroic. One of the reasons we're so good on Heroic Kill Jaden, even though we'll never be seen on Mythic Kill Jaden for a while, is because we have the ability to be at max stacks of Crusade and absolutely blow the hell out of those ads. It may mean delaying using Crusade at the start of the fight for about 5 seconds or so. It depends how many points you've got in Wrath of the Ashbringer. The same applies when he comes back down for the second time after the first flight phase. Again, usually we've got Crusade available at that time and we can get it to coincide with max stacks on the ads. During the fog phase with the ads, don't forget that when the ads start to cast, that cast is going to teleport them somewhere else. Bit annoying if you're trying to DPS them. So when they're casting, you can use Fist of Justice to stun them, and that will obviously keep them in place, hopefully long enough for you to carry on DPSing them. If anyone is able to helpfully group any together, say with Death Knight grips or anything like that, then obviously make sure you use your Divine Storm through those. Also on Kill Jaden with the Armageddon Hail, that is the large soak that needs to be immune. We're particularly good for that because we can use Divine Shield for it. Blessing of Protection, actually, this is the one thing where it does work, which means not only are you able to soak one with Blessing of Protection if necessary, you could actually get anyone to soak it by putting your Blessing of Protection on them. So that is actually a quite useful piece of utility if your raid group doesn't have very many people with immunities. And that's it for my Retribution Paladin specific advice for the Heroic Tomb of Sargeras. If you've got any further questions, feel free to add them down below, and I might do a follow-up Q&A if there's enough questions that I wasn't covering here. Remember, Trinkets, I'm going to follow up with a specific video on those next week as well. Hope you found it useful. As always, if you did, don't forget to subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.